Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, my constant listeners. Welcome back to another edition of Shaman's Way podcast. And welcome back to my semi-constant listeners, and a very warm welcome to my first-time listeners. One of the requests that I receive when I ask for podcast ideas is the medicine wheel. It probably is the most consistent request. So I'm happy to share with you some of my insights and some of my weaving thoughts on this. There is no set dialogue or script for this particular podcast, so I'm going to go from this place to that place, from this direction to that direction. What I really do hope is to give you some deeper information and some deeper thoughts on what I would have with respect to the medicine wheel. I won't start off by telling you how Sun Bear's medicine wheel chose me, because you have all heard that story. And if you're a new listener and you haven't heard that story, please, if you're interested, listen to some previous podcasts, because I think I've repeated that story at least 2 or 3 times. Understanding and working with the medicine wheel has been a project that has spanned many years, and I have spent much time journeying through the medicine wheel, understanding the medicine wheel, reading different books on the medicine wheel, obviously reading Sun Bear's work on the medicine wheel, and really doing a comparative study and a comparative analysis to what are some of the teachings that different traditions have. There is the Sacred Hoop, which is not a medicine wheel. The Sacred Hoop is also a really good magazine on shamanism by Nicholas Breezewood. But the Sacred Hoop is a term that has been used globally to refer to the cyclical or the cycle of teachings and the cycle of lessons that we do have. There's also the reed hoop that is used in different parts of Central Asia as well as a means of teaching. There is a medicine wheel of sorts in South America, and it's the Quechua, and those are the people. Anyway, they also have their own medicine wheel, which is a very fascinating medicine wheel, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't think of the word off the top of my head. However, I think that one of the points I want to make before I go off on a tangent that I can't recover from, like trying to remember the word, I think it's important that we recognize that we work with a 2D medicine wheel. So we work with a medicine wheel often that is on paper. We draw it, we look at drawings of it, we look at different diagrams of it. But it's also invaluable to remember that the medicine wheel is really a very 3-dimensional form or 3-dimensional relationship to you, because the upper world is obviously above you and the underworld or the lower world is obviously below you. So therefore now we have filled up even more time and more space. The east of you and the west of you is more space. So now we already have the bubble and encapsulation of you within inside the medicine wheel. I've talked about the 2 roads, the red road and the black road, or the blue road, depending on which tradition you come from. The red road being the world of the physical, the black/blue road being the world of the spiritual. The opportunity to go around the medicine wheel, if we study it from a yearly basis, takes on your progression of the wheel throughout the 12 months of the year. In my healing sessions, and I would encourage you to do this as well, is I ask people to use the medicine wheel as a way or a form to follow the movement of time in their life. So the movement of time in their life would be January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. Why am I asking them to do this? Sometimes when people come for healing or for exploration of self, not just healing, but really to understand the self and the soul, I ask them what are some of the patterns in their life. And if we draw out a medicine wheel, we can often see a pattern, or we can see a pattern emerging based on traumatic events, whether it be X number of years ago or X number of months ago or however many medicine wheels ago. In order to work with the medicine wheel, I think it's very important to understand patterns. So if we are using the medicine wheel to map our personal relationship to the world around us, then we are mapping not only the chronological time, we're also mapping the emotional experiences or the relationship to the seasons, the relationship to various anniversaries, the relationships to various holidays. Those all are explored within the medicine wheel. Keep it in mind at the center of the medicine wheel when I use this from a personal perspective or for a personal use. The center of the wheel is termed self. The center of the medicine wheel on an overreaching or a larger context, not just related to the individual self, we have the various stones. We have the stones that we've covered other times where we have the Creator, we have Mother Earth, we have Father Sun, we have Grandmother Moon, we have the Thunderbird clan, the Turtle clan, the Butterfly clan, and the Frog clan, representing respectively fire, earth, air, and water. So we have those aspects of the medicine wheel. If it's the center is not self, then the center are the creator stones, or the stones that basically are the anchor to the medicine wheel. If we're looking at the medicine wheel from a healing perspective globally, or we're trying to map weather, it's a very effective tool for mapping that time. What do the winds of the north mean? What does it mean when we have winds of the east or winds of the west, winds of the south? How does that affect our moods? What are the lessons of the four winds? What are the lessons that you want to explore regarding the winds? What is the lesson of the wind? Do you even have winds and the lessons of the four winds in your medicine wheel or in your teachings? I know I haven't talked a great deal about the winds, but I know that I have a different relationship to winds than I would necessarily ascribe to the four directions or to the four aspects of the wind. I know I've told various stories throughout the years. East of the Sun and West of the Moon is one that comes to mind immediately, where the individual, the heroine on her journey, has asked for the assistance of all four of the winds, and the winds all cooperating in order to get the heroine of the journey around the world, so to speak, in order for her to get to her place of destination, the place where she needs to begin, middle, and end her heroine's journey. The relationship that I have to winds is whether or not, I call them the horses, the wind horses. What are the wind horses telling me? I know that in my part of the world, I can understand what the winds of the aspen are saying in relation to what do the winds of the pines say, what do the winds on top of a mountain in Jasper say, and how are they different from the winds in Milk River in southern Alberta. So those to me are also very different winds. Now, living where we live in a province that is buttressed against a mountain range, we very rarely have westerly winds coming across, but we very often have easterly winds. And having easterly winds, I think, affects the overculture or the overreaching relationship to the earth, because the eastern winds, from a metaphorical perspective, continually bring in new ideas, continually bring in the birth of self, continually bring in etc., 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 etc. So we have that relationship to it. So if you're going to look at the medicine wheel, how it affects you, take a look at how the winds affect you. Do the winds, the northern winds, the great Siberian high when it comes down, and then we have the Idaho low with its counterclockwise and the clockwise motions of the winds between the highs and the lows, they certainly will create a massive experience or weather shift depending on which wind meets which. So in your own internal self, if you have the north wind, the cold wind, the wind of the ancestors, the wind of no sun, no moon, and then you have winds of the south and the fire come up, how do the fire winds, like that passion self, that sexual self, that creative self, how does that meet with the north winds? If you're in your intellect, if you're in your one foot leads to the other, if you're in this experiment has a beginning, has a middle, and an end, how do you make relationship between the southern winds and the northern winds? How do you make relationship between the southern spirits and the northern spirits in your own body, in your own space? Another part of the medicine wheel that I like is to use it from not only a yearly perspective, but you can use it from a day perspective. You can have the entire day. So the night, and then we have the morning, obviously is in the east. On the southern part of the medicine wheel is midday, and in the western part of the medicine wheel is evening. So we have those four aspects on a daily wheel. So on that daily wheel, what do you do at 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 blah. So all of the hours, what do you do at those particular times? The medicine wheel is a great way to also track ancestors and ancestor work. The representation of the air as in east, how do the words of your ancestors speak to you? Have you ever read anything your grandmother, your grandfather wrote? If you're adopted like myself and have no access to that, do you know what your ancestry is? I know that I'm first generation Canadian, and many of you know that my love for shamanism comes from my Finnish background, from my Finnish traditions. So how does that affect you, where you live, where you grow up, where you come from? Which wind is going to affect you? What part of the medicine wheel is going to affect you? Another aspect of the medicine wheel that I find very effective tool with respect to traveling and understanding my ancestors, if I'm looking at my ancestors, where did they come from? Did they come from a northern climate? To my constant listeners in the Southern Hemisphere, where did your ancestors come from? Were your ancestors indigenous to Australia? Did your ancestors come from another place? And it doesn't matter if you've been there 300, 400, however many hundreds of years your family has been there. Still look to see if there are any winds or any aspects of the medicine wheel where your family originated from that may still have a hold on you. Another aspect of using the medicine wheel as an ancestry is where do you put on the medicine wheel? Is physical for you in the south? Is physical in the north? Is spiritual for you in the east? Is spiritual for you in the west? Where do you put the four aspects of humankind on the medicine wheel? When you put the four aspects of humankind on the medicine wheel, can you then see so let's say that I put spirit in the north, because for me, I like my spirit in the north because it is of the ancestors. So I automatically consider that my ancestors are very old in their traditions and have very old meanings and understandings. I also put the very First Nation, the Stone people, in the north. So the stones are very important to me, and the ancestry of shamanism for my family, for my traditions, goes back many centuries. It has a broken lineage, obviously, because of the indoctrination of the Christians and the threat of practicing the Sami traditions. There's that. There's also that here in North America. There's also that in Australia. There's also that, I think, also in New Zealand. I'm not certain where in the world that an old religion has not been usurped or attempted to be thwarted by an incoming religion, except for those places that still have little and or no contact with the outside world. So that's a nice tangent. Let's get back to the medicine wheel. So the winds I've covered where do you put the 4 aspects of the human mind or the humankind into the medicine wheel. When you place that in the medicine wheel, how does that affect you? How does it affect how you see things? For me, because I put spiritual in the north along with my ancestors and how my ancestors taught me, I really like water in the west. And water in the west for me is the ocean. West for me is the spirit that contacted me or works through me or sings through me, Yamaya, who is an African being or African water goddess. She's one of the goddesses that gave life. There's also the Arctic goddess Sedna, and she also is of the west of the water, but she's also of north because she's from the northern regions. So from the part of the east where there's illumination, expression, so to get back to west and why I like water, it's also the place of creativity. It's also the place of dreams. It's also the place of deep psyche. It's also the place of your mythical creatures. It's the place of your water creatures. So many people are attracted to dolphins. Many people are attracted to whales, etc., etc. There are many traditions that have the little folk. So those could be your fairies, your trolls, your gnomes, your pikas, whatever it is that your tradition holds. Where did they put it on the wheel? Are they all around? Oftentimes for the wheel that I use specifically, those creative creatures, those mythical creatures, they end up in the west. And the west is the place also where I like to delve and dive into the places of the creative psyche or the natural psyche, the relationship of depth psychology to self. Where does this come in? How does this flow? West is a very important part for me to journey to in the spirit world if I'm looking for emotional answers. If I'm looking for ancestral answers, I'll often find it in the West. In the South, what is South? I've talked about my journey in the South on the medicine wheel in relationship to the warrior for me. So that's why for me, the physical is in the South, because it was a great growing time for me. It was a time of many opportunities. It's a time of the midday sun. It's also the time of the summer moons. It's the time of the growth periods here in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, you guys get a little bit of time to cool off. You get a little bit of time to not have the extremely hot weather that you do, because right now, as we are coming into spring equinox, you're moving into fall equinox. So you're the opposite side of this medicine wheel. So how does that apply to you? So if now that we are on into the east on the medicine wheel for you guys are in the west on the medicine wheel from my perspective, or maybe I'm just turning it upside down. I'm confusing myself. Anyhow, so for me, the South is that place. What did I integrate? Not only did I integrate the warrior, I also learned to grow up. So I grew up from being the individual who started just barely on the medicine wheel, the learnings and the teachings of being just barely on the medicine wheel, to the learnings and the teachings that have become integrated and are literally written upon my body. So when I travel west on the medicine wheel, I have all of the knowledge of the warrior, and I also have the knowledge of the old warrior, how to stay alive in a battle, as opposed to how to die quickly. I mean, I've died quickly many times over in this lifetime. How many times have you started a new idea and it never got past east? It barely made it to south. How many of us have birthed an idea in the east and actually seen it to fruition and outcome in the north, even though seeing it to fruition and outcome may have taken many turns of the medicine wheel, you eventually see that. So the South is that time for me, or that place for me, of understanding the integration of self, understanding the integrations of lessons, understanding the integrations of all of the aspects to be, so to speak. South is also the place to throw away the ways of the child and to release the ways of the temper tantrum, to release the very... what's the word I'm looking for? The impulsive view, or the impulsive way of doing things. That's also there for me in the East, or in the South. And I've talked lots about the East. I've talked about it being the place of, illumination, the place of awakening. For me, it's also a contradiction in a way, because it's the place of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. I really appreciate the lessons of the East and the lessons of Eastern mysticism, of Eastern practice. I appreciate those parts of myself. So I've incorporated some aspects of that in my medicine wheel. So I've incorporated yoga. I've incorporated chanting. I've incorporated some of the teachings and the guiding principles of soul, of karma, of ego from the Eastern perspective. And I acknowledge that the East, although the place of new beginnings, the East for me on the medicine wheel is also that place of mining some of the golden age, or some of the golden writings on soul, on mysticism, on belief. And some of the old writings from Japan, from Korea, from China, from Vietnam, there are very old and very wise leaders who have come before us that are east of the medicine wheel for me. So I don't ever forget the contradiction. North may be a time of the ancestors, but it's also the time of the birth of the new/old souls. So there are contradictions. So if we think that the medicine wheel is something very straightforward, I assure you there's nothing straightforward about the medicine wheel at all. As we go around, what are some of the strengths that you find? So if I'm working with creating an altar to North, then from my perspective, I have to place into it many of the Stone Nation, because they're the very first of all of the nations. They are the wisdom keepers. They were the beginning of this hunk of rock we now call Earth. And then water came about. And after water came about, lifetimes came about, or life came about, so on and so forth. So you see where I'm going with this. So we have that 3D reality. What is the center of the medicine wheel? The center of the medicine wheel, okay, I've talked about the center of the medicine wheel as being self, if you're doing a medicine wheel to track yourself. I've talked about the center of the medicine wheel as being that place where the fundamentals of the world come into and hold anchor spots. So your father, sun, your grandmother, moon, Mother Earth, and then you have the 4 clans, air, earth, fire, water. You have the 4 clans that sit, and you have the creator stone in the beginning. So that's the axis of the medicine wheel. But what sits in the center of the center? What sits in the center of the center is the void. It is the place of no knowledge. It is the place of wisdom. It is the place of beginnings. It is the place of the darkness. It is the place of the all-knowing, knowing nothing. It is the place, it's the matrix of all things, or that encapsulated aspect of all things. When we talk about the underworld, where is the underworld in the medicine wheel? Well, we start off if we talk about the world tree being the center of the wheel, and the world tree being the axis, like Yggdrasil. And Yggdrasil is the world tree for the Norse mythology, for the Celtic mythology, where they have all three worlds into it, and they have the directions and they have the elements, but there is another 3D relationship to the world. So we are implying, or we are placing upon the medicine wheel upon the earth so that the earth makes sense within those directions. If we were to place the tree of life, the Kabbalah, it also has 3 sections. It also is, in and of itself, contains many lessons that are very similar to that of the medicine wheel. Within the medicine wheel, for each of the directions, there are stones that refer to the love, generosity, spirit, kindness, strength, willingness. There are pathways that lead from the exterior of the circle into the interior of the circle, from the interior of the circle to the exterior of the circle. So if we were to look at it as though it was the whirling dervish or the spinning, we have the swastika, but if we actually look at the swastika as what it is, which is the original Buddhist symbol for all 4 directions, moving in their own way, independent of one another, but moving distinctly behind one another, because although they're independent, they are interdependent and intradependent. So we have the complexity of the medicine wheel, that each direction stands on its own, but each direction is informed by the direction that comes after it, before it, and underneath it. We have that each of the winds are informed by all of the other winds that have come before it. So the eastern wind may blow the weakest, but it is still a part of the breath of the north wind that supposedly blows the strongest. So we have all of the mixtures of the winds. We understand in the wheel, you cannot get away from one part without it feeding into the next part. Where you have illumination in the east, you have that excitement, the ecstasy, the movement, and the taking of action for that illumination. And from action, we come into illumination of self. So we come from the illumination, action, into introspection. We have illumination, action, introspection into the creation of wisdom, or the seeding of the soul, seeding of the soul, or the relationship of soul to whole. And then we have that coming back around again. So everything informs the other. So it is not as though our mental cannot inform our physical, cannot inform our spiritual, and cannot inform our emotional. We have all of the aspects, but we cut ourselves off. The medicine wheel is a good teacher to not only inclusion, but separation. For the north does not always know what the south is doing, the east or the west. How many times have you heard the left hand is not aware of what the right hand is doing, or vice versa? That's also in relation to ourselves. I mean, when Descartes separated in his medical schooling, separated the soul from the body, or the mind from the body, in fact created an entity unto itself, and forbade the knowledge of the ancestors that said everything works in together. But here, this particular individual decided that soul and spirit have no place in medicine, and that one does not come from the other. But we understand that in the medicine wheel, it all informs itself. But in this world, we still have a very strong relationship to disassociation. We have a very strong relationship with not admitting that one part informs the other part, which informs the other part, and so on. We have a case of, forgetful amnesia. We on purpose forget that the physical is related to the emotional. That anxiety can be found living within the body, not only having a physiological effect, but where is the root of that anxiety? So when you are doing your medicine wheel and you're putting self in the center, right anxiety in the center, right depression in the center, right exuberance in the center. And where do those things come from? Can you track where those things come from? Can you see on your wheel if you work through time? Can you see where your anxiety started? Was it at age of 2, age of 3, age of 6, age of 12, age of 20? Where did that anxiety begin? And then we can track, where is my relationship to the earth? Where is my relationship to air? Where is my relationship to water? Where's my relationship to my ancestors? Where's my relationship to my family, immediate and long gone? So the medicine wheel as a 2D picture is very simplistic. But when we expand it to that 3D reality, we recognize that all aspects of the wheel inform all other aspects of the wheel. Whether we're aware of it or not is slightly irrelevant, but it is an aspect of it. I like to encourage each person to journey to the 4 directions of the medicine wheel. I've encouraged you many times over to journey to meet the spirit of the north, to meet the spirit of the east, the south, and the west. And what is your relationship with that? If you are having challenges in the physical, where does the physical go on your medicine wheel? And if you're having challenges with the physical, is there something that you can do in the other realms, in the emotional, in the intellectual? Can you go through those realms and talk to those aspects of yourself to get more help with respect to the physical part of yourself, or vice versa? So we have many ways of exploring the self, utilizing the medicine wheel. What are the teachings of the 12 moons for you? Have you forgotten what they are? Do you know what relationship the moons have in relationship to the elements? So which moons are water, which moons are air, which moons are earth, which moons are fire, and how are they affecting you? If you're a fire sign and you're in a fire moon, does that affect you? Does that enhance your spiritual work? Or does it have absolutely no effect at all? Does this have no effect to you at all, period? So when you journey or when you practice shamanism, is the medicine wheel not even a part of your reality? Or is it a part of your reality you're just trying to incorporate? These are questions to ask yourself. Is it an important part of your walk on spirituality? If it's not an important part of your walk on spirituality, then so be it. For me, it is a fundamental tool to understanding self. It's a fundamental tool to putting the world into perspective. It's a fundamental tool for putting the relationship to self into perspective, the relationship of family into perspective. How to track emotional, physical patterns and cycles? How do you track the seasons? How do you track the evolution or de-evolution of the soul on the medicine wheel? We have a great spirit born in the east, and the child is born with so much potential. But by the time the child reaches south, the child is a withered rose or is a withered plant or is so on and so forth. So how did that affect that part of the wheel? How did that part of the wheel bring that person down? And how do we bring that person back up? How do you bring yourself back up? Exploring how the relationship of the medicine wheel affects us is essential in my mind. It's essential to understanding how I myself operate, how I myself see the world. I haven't even touched on animals that are associated with 4 directions. But there are animals associated with the 4 directions. There's the eagle in the east. There's Chaudenis, which is the coyote. There's Majikiwas, which is in the west, which is bear. There's Waboon, which is the buffalo in the north, and it's Waboose in the east. And then there are all the other creatures. There are the creepy crawly things. They're the ones that slither on the ground. There are all the 4-legged. There are all the winged ones. And where do they go on the medicine wheel for you? Where do you find inspiration? When you have talked to your power animals, Can they tell you what area of the medicine wheel they're from, or what area of the spirit world they're from? Do they represent the eastern part of the medicine wheel? So if you have bear come to you, does bear for you, is that Majikiwas West? Is that bear for you the awakening bear after hibernation? Is that polar bear for you? Is that the time and the place of north? Is it the brown bear, who is associated with the south and with summer and with the gathering of things? We have the hare, and the hare can be associated with east and fertility and Easter. We have the hare in the north, who is often considered to be the consort or the spirit of the beginner beings, or the beings who are in relation to birthing the world. The hare can also be considered an animal in the moon, and the hare lives in the moon. So we have many different places for different animals as well. The snake can be considered of the south because it's warm and sheds its skin, but it can also be considered of the west because it can be of water. It can be of the going between all of the worlds, so mystery, consciousness, and psyche. It can be associated with north in one of the wisdom keepers, one of the reptiles, one of the oldest people, one of the oldest beings. So you see where I'm going? Where I'm going is that you can go anywhere with the medicine wheel, but it takes dedication to figure it out. I've been at this how many years, and I'm still constantly learning something. I still am teaching the medicine wheel, even after all these years. I'm still trying to bring the medicine wheel home to all of us, home to myself, in order to teach to others. This is my hope. These are some of the things I have thought about. I know that there are very specific questions, or there are very specific things that you may want to understand or learn about. And maybe we can meet again at the microphone, at the earbuds, at the noise-canceling headphones, in your vehicle, wherever we meet again, and discuss the medicine wheel more in depth. There are many aspects of the wheel that we haven't really discussed, but this is a good overview, and I hope that you have enjoyed my mental meandering. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I wish you just the most pleasant rest of your day, your evening, your week, your whatever. And thank you for tuning back in to Shaman's Way as usual. And I thank you for your kind attention. I always look forward to your comments and your feedback. Until next time.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.